That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
My God, the running back position is disgusting to say the least. I know that a lot of y'all are not even going to have the capability of going through and selling some of these running backs because right now, running backs are impossible to come by with injuries to McCaffrey, Barkley, Derrick Henry, James Robinson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, David Montgomery. I mean, so many damn running backs have gone down this season that I know you're probably struggling, but there are so many other owners struggling in your league as well that a lot of these marginal running backs, I think that we can actually sell for a long-term upgrade in the starting lineup. So yeah, we're going to be going through talking about some of these sell high running backs here. Of course, before we dive into it, you know we have to give away some free Fantasy Flock Network hats to people who left a like and a comment on the last video. Our first one coming out to Mean Bean, who says, thanks for the 7-1 start, Derrick Henry. You shall be missed. I know. R.I.P. Derrick Henry. Happy to hear you're 7-1 though. And then our next comment coming out from Team Galaxy says, for the second week in a row, I went 3-3 for W's in my league. You're the best, mates. Keep up the good work. No, thank you so much, my friend. And of course, if you win that Fantasy Vlog Network hat in one of these videos, just make sure you send me an email ASAP with your physical address so I can get you that hat directly. And lastly, if you just want to go through, support the channel, get a Fantasy Flock Network hat on your own, not necessarily have to win one, you can always consider going and supporting the channel on Patreon. Over there on Patreon, when you join, you get an in-depth team breakdown where I personally go and break down your fantasy team with a podcast. You also get our rest of season rankings that are updated every single week. Those rest of season rankings should be updated on Patreon at the time of this video upload. You get our dynasty rankings. You get to get in a dynasty league with us this offseason. You get in our group chat. I mean, there's so many things going on over there on Patreon. Make sure you consider joining the flock. That should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into these running backs. And let's start it off with a bona fide stud. I'm going to be drawing a line in the sand right now saying it's time to sell Alvin Kamara. Now, with Alvin Kamara, I know that he has been pretty damn good this year. I mean, you're probably happy if you decided to take Alvin Kamara at 3-4 overall, considering every other running back in that range has been hurt at some point. And right now, I mean, Alvin Kamara is cruising. He's the running back 7 so far this season. I mean, if you're going to be looking at a points per game contest, he is a top 5 running back. And if you're diving into the production, I mean, it's been very stable. You've had 1 week in particular where Kamara didn't get any usage in the receiving game, but outside of that, it's nothing out of the ordinary. And with Alvin Kamara here, he's actually been seeing his career high in rushing attempts, even though I want to just go back to what we have always talked about on this channel when we're referring to these running back opportunities. And it's not the amount of raw opportunities that equal fantasy points for a given running back. That's what led a lot of people in the wrong direction of saying, oh, we need to be avoiding DeAndre Swift. Oh, we need to be avoiding Aaron Jones. No, what matters is the valuable touches in a backfield. With Kamara, we don't care if he's coming out and getting 20 carries between the tackles. If those 20 carries between the tackles, between the 20-yard lines, are going to equal 51 rushing yards, that does us nothing from a fantasy football context. What we need to see is we need to see the elite usage in the receiving game as well as the usage in the red zone, which is what Kamara has had so far this season. Alvin Kamara through 7 weeks has had 28 receptions, so he's giving you 4 receptions a game. I mean, not what we're used to with Alvin Kamara, but still, it hasn't been bad at all. And on top of this, with Alvin Kamara, he has had that usage in the red zone. He's come away with 6 touchdowns so far this season, which is why he has been so damn productive. Now, we have to ask ourselves, is this something we can expect going forward? And the realistic answer, in my opinion, is no. And the reason for this is Jameis Winston. This past week, Jameis Winston, definitely not a better quarterback than Drew Brees for Alvin Kamara, but he's kind of a similar quarterback in that we know Jameis Winston's not going to scramble. We know Jameis Winston isn't going to be stealing any touchdowns at the goal line himself. He comes out, he tears his ACL. So Winston is out for the season. And yes, Taysom Hill was out over the past few weeks with his own concussion, but Taysom Hill should be good to go this upcoming week. And I'd imagine, based on what we had when Drew Brees went down last year, that Taysom Hill is going to be taking the start for the New Orleans Saints. And what I want to do really quick is I want to go back to 2020 and look at what Taysom Hill did to Alvin Kamara in this offense. Because going back to what we were saying previously, with Kamara, we're not chasing the carries between the 20s. That doesn't matter at all. With Kamara, we're chasing the usage in the red zone, and we are also chasing the targets out of the backfield. And Taysom Hill will not only affect one of those things, he will affect both in a negative way. We already see, if you pull up Taysom Hill's 2020 statistics, the first thing that jumps out at you is 7 rushing touchdowns. Now, 7 rushing touchdowns does not say it all, because if you actually dive into the games that he started for the New Orleans Saints, he was averaging a rushing touchdown a game. That is not encouraging, to say the least, with Kamara's red zone usage. At the same time, if we're going to go through, look at weeks 11, 12, 13, and 14, which are the 4 weeks that we had from Taysom Hill. Let me pull up those stats for Alvin Kamara so we can see that fantasy drop-off. Let's start it off week 11, 10 fantasy points. Week 12, 6 fantasy points, then 17 and 22. So it's not like Alvin Kamara is becoming a running back that you can't start in fantasy, but he's not coming close to his usual 23 points per game whenever you have Taysom Hill at quarterback. He's a lot closer to 15 points per game. And does this make sense? Is this something that we can project going forward? It most likely is, because if we're going over and we're looking at Alvin Kamara, I mean, it's not like he got incredibly unlucky with rushing touchdowns. He did have 2 rushing touchdowns through the first 4 games with Taysom Hill, but the problem is the lack of usage in the receiving game. So if you're looking at a baseline rate of what we have come to expect from Alvin Kamara, with Drew Brees in particular, throughout his entire NFL career, you were getting 7 targets a game with Kamara consistently, which is what made him that elite fantasy option, as we've already discussed. Those carry between the 20, they don't necessarily matter too much for Alvin Kamara. Whereas the targets out of the backfield with Taysom Hill, they were not at 7 targets a game. You get 1 target the first week, 2 targets the second week, 3 targets the third week, and 10 the last week. So some simple math, that tells us that's 16 targets through 4 weeks. That drops it down to 4 targets a game. And if you're going to be looking at the receptions out of that list, he had 10 receptions through 4 weeks there. So with Alvin Kamara, you're getting the drastic drop-off with his touchdowns and at the same time with his receptions out of the backfield. That is a death nail for him. And let me pull up my rest of season rankings over there on Patreon. We've updated our running back rankings already. I'm going to be having to work on the wide receiver rankings tonight. They should be posted by the time this video comes out. But we actually moved Alvin Kamara down to running back 5, which I know that doesn't sound like that big of a fall, but consider all the injured running backs right now. I mean, consider the fact that you have an injured McCaffrey, you have an injured Barkley, you have an injured Henry. I mean, Kamara being at running back 5 is pretty damn low. And I think you can reasonably go through and trade Alvin Kamara for one of 3 options. Actually, I'll just give you my rankings in the top 5. Of course, you can find the rest on Patreon. But we have Dalvin at 1. We have CMC at 2, praying that he comes back soon. We have Najee Harris at 3 and Austin Eckler at 4. I think there's a decent chance, I can almost say with certainty, that you could go through and flip Alvin Kamara in your league for at least one of those running backs there. And I think that is a no-brainer that I'm doing every single time, because if we're getting Taysom Hill, I know there's a chance that Taysom Hill doesn't start. No, I'm expecting Taysom Hill to be the Saints starting quarterback going forward. I think it really does hurt Alvin Kamara. Now, our next sell high running back is someone that we listed as a buy low candidate just a month ago. But yeah, no, we're going to buy low. We're going to ride that production up. We're going to sell high. You know how we play it. Let's go over to Elijah Mitchell, coming off of massive back-to-back performances. And I have to give a shout out to Slim74, always out in the live streams. Y'all know we live stream every single night. Make sure you hit the bell next to the subscribe button if you haven't been able to make it out to the streams. But he's coming out and going, hey, Mason, are we sure that Elijah Mitchell's not going to get that receiving down usage? I mean, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we know that he's not going to. And with Elijah Mitchell, it hasn't mattered over the past 2 weeks. Elijah Mitchell has been fantastic in San Francisco, where if you're looking at week 7 against the Indianapolis Colts, he comes out 18 carries, 107 rushing yards, and the rushing touchdown to go along with it. In week 8 against Chicago, you get 18 carries, 137 rushing yards, and the rushing touchdown. This is what we came to expect from Elijah Mitchell as soon as we were getting him back from that injury, which is why you're coming out and you are saying to buy him low. But a big issue is that I think a lot of people are now viewing this production from Elijah Mitchell and assuming that this is more so his median projection, whereas we have to understand when a running back does not have a role at all in their receiving game. I mean, literally nothing at all here. This is best case scenario for Elijah Mitchell. Trust me, I wish we could say that this is what you should come to expect going forward. But if we're just talking about how this production can dip down, what are the two things that are most volatile week to week? The touchdown rate, as well as yards per carry at the running back position. We want to be chasing opportunity. We know opportunity is going to be very stable throughout the entire season with given running backs. And if you have a running back, say like Chase Edmonds, and with Chase Edmonds, he's coming out. I mean, yes, he scores the rushing touchdown this past week, but he really hasn't found the end zone that often. But this is a running back that's had 30 receptions so far this season. Every single week, you're getting 4 or 5 targets for Chase Edmonds out of the backfield. You're getting about 50, 60 rushing yards, and the rushing touchdown isn't there. So that does make Edmonds a player that, yes, it sucks to say that he may not have the same spike week potential, but his floor is going to be a lot higher. And if you pull up my rest of season rankings, I do not have Chase Edmonds ranked over Elijah Mitchell, but I mean, neither does anybody else. I think right now you're looking at Elijah Mitchell as a running back version of Damian Harris in San Francisco. And this is what we discussed coming into the week, that once Elijah Mitchell hits 100 rushing yards in a game, and he also gets there with the rushing touchdown, you are jumping up in joy because that's exactly what you were looking for. And he will be a high-end running back too in that contest. But we have to also see the downside with these running backs. We have to see the downside when they don't get that rushing touchdown. And that is going to be pretty damn low. Because if you're going to go through and look at Elijah Mitchell, and let's say he regresses, and instead of Elijah Mitchell coming out and seeing a 5.5 yards per carry, coming away with the rushing touchdown pretty much every single time he is getting the 15 plus touches, you actually see the yards per carry. Let's say it falls down to 4.5, which I know that this is just an arbitrary number, but it's still useful to kind of look at the entire range of outcomes with this given player. That falls down to 4.5 with Elijah Mitchell. You're getting about, let's just call it 80 rushing yards in a given contest. And if he's not coming away with that rushing touchdown and he has no usage in the receiving game, 80 rushing yards for Elijah Mitchell, best case scenario is 8 fantasy points. So, I mean, you're seeing Elijah Mitchell become a touchdown or bust player, essentially. And I think right now we are going to be able to essentially just move Elijah Mitchell over, try to get to a running back like Josh Jacobs. I think that would be a significantly better play, in that you're looking at Josh Jacobs and what he has given you in Las Vegas in a limited sample so far. And yeah, with Josh Jacobs, we know that we're really reliant on the touchdown there as well. But with Jacobs, however, you've seen 5 targets. I mean, over the past 4 targets. We know that looking at week 7, really hard to see just because he did leave that game early. So essentially the last 3 healthy weeks we have had with Josh Jacobs, this is a running back that has averaged close to 4 targets a game. This is a running back that has averaged about 3.5 receptions a game. And then at the same time, 25 receiving yards. So he's giving a 5.5 points per game boost over Elijah Mitchell. And Josh Jacobs isn't even a great receiving down running back. And we know Josh Jacobs has that same touchdown upside based on what we have historically seen. So I think it's just a very easy call to go through and look at those players that are running very hot with touchdowns and say, it's probably a pretty good idea to sell. We'll get to another one of those guys later on in the video. But speaking of a running back who just dropped multiple scores this week, we actually had him listed as a sell high running back a week ago. Let's go over to Melvin Gordon. Now with Melvin Gordon, I'm having to put a massive asterisk on this because the NFL trade deadline is this week. And I will say, out of all the running backs that could potentially get traded to Tennessee, Melvin Gordon would make sense because he is on the veteran contract. You're already seeing Denver go through and sell some of those veteran assets to get future picks. I think it would make a lot of sense for Denver to move on from Melvin Gordon and just roll with Javonte Williams going forward. So I want to put an asterisk on this. Thomas, actually, if he gets traded tomorrow by the time you edit this video, yeah, just take him out. But if Melvin Gordon does stay in Denver, based on that Von Miller trade that we just had going to Los Angeles for a couple second round picks, I think we are beginning to get the sense that, this team is packing it in. With this team for the Denver Broncos, there's really no incentive to continue to use Melvin Gordon in that 50-50 split. And I know a lot of people are going to see the 21 points that you had from Melvin Gordon this week compared to what you actually had with Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams down at 6.5 points, and just naturally assume that Melvin Gordon is still the starting running back there and they're not splitting work. Well, Javonte Williams, if you're looking at the usage in this offense, he had 9 carries, 4 targets out of this backfield. Whereas if you're going to be looking at Melvin Gordon, it's very similar. With Melvin Gordon, you had 3 targets out of the backfield and 10 carries. So it was essentially a 50-50 split. We had to ask ourselves, Did Melvin Gordon look significantly better? Was he significantly more efficient? Or did he luck box into the 2 touchdowns for this offense? And it was the latter, not the sooner. So I think that you definitely need to be looking at Melvin Gordon and saying, okay, well, he gets 2 touchdowns this week. If those 2 touchdowns aren't there, clearly, I mean, nobody's getting that hyped about Melvin Gordon. So I think if we could go through, just use him in a trade package, go ship him to a team that just lost Derrick Henry, go ship him to a team that just lost James Robinson. If we can get a significant upgrade at wide receiver for that, I think it would make a lot of sense because Melvin Gordon, his long-term upside, unless he gets moved to Tennessee, very limited. Now, speaking of someone with not much long-term upside, let's go over to Kahlil Herbert here, and let's just talk about the fact that this is a running back that we need to be selling ASAP because you're going to get David Montgomery back soon. With David Montgomery, I know the latest report that we are seeing, keep in mind, I am recording this on November 1st at about 3 p.m. So yeah, maybe something comes out about David Montgomery. We live stream every single night. So if anything comes out, we'll definitely be the first person to go out there and tell you about it. But the last report we get on David Montgomery really is essentially saying that this is a running back that you should be expecting to come back after that week 10 bye against the Baltimore Ravens in week 11. And keep in mind that bye week is in week 10. So in week 9, the Chicago Bears are going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know the Steelers don't have an elite level defense as they have in previous seasons, but still it's a pretty solid defense from Pittsburgh that just limited Nick Chubb to 16 carries, 61 rushing yards, 1 reception, and 8 receiving yards. They just limited Nick Chubb to about 8 fantasy points this past week. And if you're looking at Kahlil Herbert, what was really weird is they actually started off with Damian Williams getting the work at the beginning of this game. Williams did have a knee injury. It is yet to be said if he will be playing this next week or not. But you don't see them committing to Herbert right away. So I know a lot of people are going to be on, okay, 23 carries. He's locked in, just what we thought. Not necessarily. And a big thing is, just even if you're assuming that Herbert is going to have a small role when David Montgomery comes back after the bye week, you're not going to be able to start Herbert. Best case scenario, he's getting 25% of the touches in the Chicago Bears backfield, where David Montgomery is seeing the majority of those carries. And best case scenario, Kahlil Herbert, a 25% snap rate player on a Chicago Bears offense. I mean, what is he getting you? He's getting you 4 points per game. He's just a handcuff running back. I think right now, if you could go through, you could sell him for Tony Pollard, AJ Dillon, Alexander Madison. I would prefer any of those options, just knowing that those are premium handcuff running backs that if the starter goes down, all of a sudden you see them jumping up into being top 10 options guaranteed. But with Herbert, that's not necessarily the case here. And you're going to get David Montgomery back most likely after the bye week. And you're not wanting to really play Herbert in week 9 anyway against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think while he has any name value, I would rather pivot over. Go get AJ Dillon for him right now. I think that'd be a fantastic trade with a lot more long-term upside. Now let's go over to one more running back. And you know it would not be a Fantasy Flock Network video if I did not come out and tell you to sell high on this option. Let's go over and let's talk about James Conner. And every single week we come out and to say, sell high on James Conner, sell high on James Conner. He comes out and he manages to score a touchdown. Yes, I know. Trust me, I get it. And I know James Conner, this is a running back that has had 8 rushing touchdowns over the past 6 weeks, which of course you can get really excited about. But at the same time, we can all sit here and we can all acknowledge that he is a touchdown or bust player. This is best case scenario for James Conner, because you're not expecting Conner to go out there and average more than a touchdown and a half a game. There's no way in hell you can expect that. So best case scenario with James Conner so far, does anybody have any guesses on where he is on a points per game standpoint so far this season? I'll just pause for a little bit. That way the people in the Premier can go through, they can guess where James Conner, who's had 8 rushing touchdowns over the past 6 weeks, is so far this season on a points per game basis. He's the running back 29 on a points per game basis. This is an option that is a mid running back 3. Okay, so even though we have been wrong in saying that Kyler Murray is going to begin to vulture these rushing touchdowns away from James Robinson, and they're not going to be there over the long haul, how wrong have we been if this is a running back that's coming out in week 8 on Thursday night, getting multiple rushing touchdowns, and the only other statistics he's even adding to that is 2.2 fantasy points from 22 rushing yards? I mean, this is a player that, very similar to what we were discussing with Elijah Mitchell, it is so hard for these options in a PPR format that don't get anything in the receiving game to be valuable in fantasy. The rushing volume is not enough. And this rushing production so far in the touchdown department in particular is very fragile, where if you're going to try to predict this going forward, you are going to be wrong 9 times out of 10 if you're going to say that this maintains. The touchdown rate is drastically going to come down. It simply can't afford to do that with James Conner if you're going to be planning on putting him in your starting lineup. So easily a player that I'm looking to sell. I will tell you, I was terrified though when Chase Edmonds was down for a little bit with the shoulder injury on Thursday night, because if Edmonds does go down, James Conner becomes a top 12 running back in fantasy. But I think he's very similar like A.J. Dillon, where he's that premium handcuff running back that has a small role in his offense. Now, thank you, of course, for coming out and supporting the channel. Thank you so much for watching the video. Go down there, drop that like, leave a comment letting me know how stupid I am. Subscribe to the channel. And if you want a Fantasy Vlog Network hat, you want a podcast breaking down your fantasy team in depth, if you want our rest of season rankings or dynasty rankings, if you want whatever, that can all be found down in the description of the video. All those links will be going to Patreon, so consider joining the flock on Patreon. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. Have a great day, and I'll see y'all with the live stream tonight.